Salem's Lot UK presents A Return to the Lot. Many weeks have passed since that unforgettable night in Salem's Lot. Ben Mears and Mark Petrie have been traveling from town to town every couple of days using the vial of holy water as a guide. Almost like a compass. Every time the vial glowed a luminous blue, they have had to move town so that they can remain hidden from any remaining vampires that lurk in the night. Ben is sleeping, stirring from a restless dream. He sees Susan as he sleeps.
Ben, you must return, go back to Jerusalem's Lot. You must before it's too late.
Ben shoots up from his surreal dream.
Mark, wake up. We have to go.
Mark groggily rubbed his eyes, blinking against the early morning gloom filtering through the blinds of the cheap motel room.
Go? Go where?
He mumbled, still half asleep.
Back.
Ben said, already out of bed and pulling on his worn jacket.
Salem's Lot. Susan came to me in a dream. No. It was more than that. She spoke to me. Warned me. Something's happening there. Something bad.
Mark sat up, the urgency in Ben's voice snapping him fully awake.
But we burned it. The town was done. There's nothing left.
Ben turned to him, the vial in his hand. It pulsed softly, a faint but unmistakable blue.
It's not done. I thought we ended it, but this glow, it's different. It's not warning us to run this time. It's pointing us back.
Mark stared at the vial, its eerie light reflected in Ben's eyes. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't glowing when they tried to leave. It was glowing now, as they considered returning. Almost like it was urging them home.
Then we don't have a choice.
Mark said grimly, climbing out of bed.
If something's still there, we finish it. For good. Pack what you can carry. We leave within the hour.
Outside, the wind howled through the parking lot, carrying a distant echo that neither of them could quite place. It sounded like laughter. They drove through most of the day, the dust-covered Jeep, rumbling over cracked highways and empty backroads. The landscape changed around them, from towns that looked half alive to stretches of nothingness, fields rotting in the sun. By dusk, the sky had turned to bruised purple, and the trees grew thicker, denser. They were close. Salem's Lot didn't welcome them back. The town lay under a stillness that was wrong, like it was holding its breath. Buildings stood like empty husks, blackened and sagging. Ash clung to the ground like a second skin. The church steeple, once a proud sentinel over the town, was now just a jagged tooth against the sky. Ben parked near the ruins of the Marston house. Nothing but rubble remained, yet, it felt unsettled, as though something were burrowing beneath.
This place should not exist.
Mark said trembling.
Not after the fire.
Ben stepped out, vial in hand. The blue glow was brighter now, humming gently in his grip.
It's here. Something survived.
They moved cautiously down what was once a welcoming, pleasant town. Passing burned-out shops and boarded windows. The wind was still. No birds. No crickets. Just silence, until they reached the old town square. A familiar figure stood in the distance. At first, it looked like a scarecrow, tall, unmoving, wrapped in what might have once been a coat, the brim of a hat casting a shadow where a face should be. But as they drew closer, Mark stopped dead in his tracks.
Ben, is that? No, it can't be. Straker. We killed him, right?
We need to get to the root of what is still feeding on Salem's Lot.
Welcome home, Mr. Mears,
he said in a voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Ben pulled Mark behind him.
You can't be here. I killed you.
Ha. The soil remembers. The blood remembers. You burned the house, yes. But not the roots.
Straker raising a long-fingered hand and pointed behind them. They turned, and froze. From the shadows of alleys and half-collapsed buildings, figures began to emerge. Not running. Not lunging. Just watching. Dozens of them. Hollow-eyed. Familiar. Too familiar. Mark's voice caught in his throat.
Ben, that's Danny Glick.
And it was. Or something that wore what was left of Danny. Skin stretched tight. Eyes gleaming like glass marbles. A slow, knowing smile. Then another face joined the crowd. Marjorie Glick. Ben stumbled backward, the vial nearly slipping from his fingers. Its glow had become a steady pulse now, faster, brighter. Urgent.
This town is ours now. Actually, it always has been, but you just didn't know. The fire was only a pruning. You cut the tree, but the seed remained. And you've brought the water,
said Straker with a stern grin. Ben's stomach dropped. The vial. It wasn't just a guide. It was a key. A fuel. And whatever lay beneath Salem's lot, it was waking up. He turned to Mark.
We need to find the church.
You think we can still stop this?
Ben looked at the vial. At the sea of eyes closing in, catching a glimpse of another figure. Mike Ryerson, watching him with a stare that almost looked motionless.
I don't know,
he said.
But I think that's why Susan visited. Or it's just my guilty conscience.
Straker's voice echoed through the square like a church bell tolling doom.
There is no use in continuing to fight against your fate, Mr. Mears. This town has chosen. And all will be revealed soon enough.
The crowd of undead began to close in, not running, but gliding forward with grim inevitability, like the tide creeping in to drown the shore. Their footsteps were nearly silent. The only sound was the thrum of the vial and the rising drumbeat of Ben's heart. Mark raised the old cross he carried, worn, scorched, but still intact.
Get back!
He shouted, his voice cracking. For a moment, the crowd recoiled. A few hissed. Some faded into shadows. But Straker remained unmoved.
Symbols only hold power if you believe in them. How is your faith, Mr. Petrie? I hope it's better than Father Callahan's was in your kitchen.
Mark's hand trembled. Ben grabbed his arm, forcing the cross higher.
Believe harder.
Then, a sound. A bell. Low. Rusted. Far away, yet impossibly close. Ben turned, eyes widening. The church. The bell tolled again. Straker's grin faltered. He stepped back, slightly, and the crowd shifted like a wind had passed through it. Ben didn't wait. He ran, the vial guiding him with a flickering blue trail through the desolate streets. Mark followed, clutching the cross like a lifeline. Behind them, the undead watched, and began to move, slowly at first, then faster, more desperate. The bell rang again, louder now, and as Ben rounded the corner near the old library, he saw it. The church. Its frame was shrouded in ash and shadow, but within it, something glowed faintly, gold, pulsing, like a heartbeat. Ben approached. The vial flared. The glow inside the spectral church pulsed in response. Mark whispered,
Will we be safe?
Ben stepped into the doorway, and felt the air shift. Time bent. The temperature dropped. But the moment he crossed the threshold, the figures stopped advancing. Even Straker, now visible across the street, remained at bay.
It's not just a church,
Ben said, his voice soft with dawning realization.
It's a memory of one. A relic. Still holy, even in this time of dire need.
He held the vial aloft. Light exploded outward, not blue now, but white gold, radiant and pure. The undead shrieked, dispersing one by one. Straker raised an arm, howling, blocking his face from the glow. Ben felt it. The power wasn't in the vial alone. It was in him. In them. This wasn't a weapon, it was a reckoning.
Ben, we killed the master. But now we must destroy them all.
Ben lowered the vial. Sweat on his brow.
We need more than just holy water, crosses and stakes. We also need faith.
The church was cold and silent. Its sanctity worn thin by fear and weariness. Ben and Mark lay huddled in a darkened corner near the altar. Wrapped in dusty choir robes they'd pulled from a storage closet. The pews were empty, broken stained glass windows black with night. Somewhere outside, Salem's lot held its breath, waiting. Mark clutched his small silver cross tightly in his hand, fingers white around it, lips moving silently in prayer or memory. He hadn't slept. Not really. Not since everything changed. He stared at the stone floor, eyes flitting toward the doors every so often, waiting for the sun. Ben stirred beside him, a restless twitch in his sleep, a man haunted even in dreams. When the first threads of light cut through the eastern glass, pink and gold against the ash-gray gloom, Ben sat up.
It's morning,
Mark whispered. Ben nodded.
Come on.
They slipped out of the church as quietly as they'd entered, keeping to the long shadows of early day. The streets were too quiet. They moved quickly, breath held, ears tuned to every creak and gust of wind. The library stood at the edge of the town square, untouched by flame or rot, but changed all the same, its silence louder than any siren. Inside, the air was stale, books covered in a fine sheen of dust. Ben moved with purpose to the reference section while Mark kept watch by the main doors. Moments later, Ben returned with a folded map, the red brick outline of Jerusalem's lot spread across creased parchment. He pulled a pen from his pocket, laid the map on a reading table, and flattened it.
Here's the plan,
Ben said, voice low but firm.
We go through this town, house by house. Street by street. We mark off each one as we clear it. We don't stop until we've found every last vampire.
Mark hesitated. His voice trembled.
Even Susan?
Ben didn't answer at first. He looked down, jaw clenched.
Even Susan,
he said finally. Mark looked toward the nearest window, where sunlight slanted in through a crack in the shutters.
What happens at sundown?
Ben folded the map carefully, his hand lingering for a moment.
We don't spend another night here,
he said.
Not in Salem's lot.
Where then?
Ferndale, maybe. It's close. High ground. Safer. We just need to survive today. Make progress. And be gone before the dark.
They both knew what nightfall brought. And it was already racing toward them. Mark and Ben stepped out of the library into the muted afternoon light. The streets were unnervingly quiet, too quiet, and the wind carried the acrid scent of old smoke. They made their way toward Barlow and Straker's on Francis Street, the antique shop standing out like a ghost from another time. It was as good a place as any to begin. The shop's front door was swollen and warped from moisture and heat. Ben leaned into it, giving a hard shoulder barge. With a groan and a sharp crack, it gave way. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of charred wood. The fire hadn't touched the building directly, but the ash had found its way in all the same. Gray coated everything, shelves, display cases, century-old furniture. They moved through the shop in silence, taking in the relics of a past world. But aside from dusty antiques, there was nothing of use, no supplies, no clues, no life. That grim pattern repeated over the next 6 buildings. Larry Crockett's real estate, Officer Gillespie's office, a clothing boutique, a pharmacy, stripped bare. Each was a dead end. At the corner, Ben paused, squinting down the street.
Let's try the cafe. We might strike lucky with some food and drink.
The cafe doors were unlocked. Inside, it was still and dim, but mostly intact. Mark made a beeline for the drinks fridge, grabbing a bottle of water and twisting the cap off in one fluid motion. He downed 3/4 of it in long, desperate gulps before looking up.
Want a bottle?
He asked, his voice raw.
Yeah, toss me a couple.
Ben replied, unzipping his rucksack and beginning to load it with anything that looked edible: chocolate bars, biscuits, potato chips. The wrappers crackled like dry leaves.
Mark, bring some bottles with you.
He called over his shoulder. Ben went up to the stove behind the counter. With a flick of his lighter, the flame hissed to life. He filled a pan with water and set it on to boil.
Mark, would you like a coffee?
Yes, please, Ben.
Mark said, leaning against the counter, bottle in hand. 20 minutes later, they sat together at a corner table with mugs of coffee and a half-empty pack of biscuits between them. The warmth of the drink did little to erase the chill in their bones, but it helped. Ben opened the folded map, marked up with scribbles and lines. They crossed off each location they'd checked so far.
We've got about 2 hours,
Ben said, tapping the map.
Then we need to move and find somewhere to spend the night.
Mark leaned closer.
Ferndale?
Ben nodded.
Yes, it's our best option.
They finished the remainder of Francis Street in a methodical sweep, building by building. Nothing. No food, no signs of other survivors, just more silence and more dust. By the time they reached the jeep, the sun was slipping behind the hills, bleeding gold and crimson into the sky. Shadows stretched long across the road. Ben climbed into the driver's seat. Mark threw the rucksack in the footwell and pulled the door shut behind him. Without a word, they drove on toward Ferndale, chasing the last light of day. The road into Ferndale curved through low hills and open woodland, the last light of the sun flickering through bare branches like a dying fire. The jeep rumbled along in near silence, the tension between Mark and Ben palpable. They hadn't spoken much since leaving Francis Street. There wasn't much left to say. Just outside the town limits, Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something in the footwell had caught his eye. He looked down, and froze. A faint, pulsing blue glow was coming from inside the rucksack at his feet.
Ben, what do you see here?
He asked. His voice low, uncertain. Ben flicked his eyes downward briefly. The glow was unmistakable, like a heartbeat trapped in a bag. His brows furrowed in confusion, but before he could say a word, something else caught his attention. Movement in the rearview mirror. The blanket in the back seat was stirring. His blood ran cold. Slamming the brakes, the jeep screeched to a sudden halt, dust billowing up around them in the fading light. The world went still, but the blanket continued to shift, writhing now, as if something underneath it was waking. Mark reached under his seat and nudged Ben, silently passing him a wooden stake. As he turned, the figure beneath the blanket began to rise. A pair of pale hands emerged first, then the blanket slipped, revealing the face beneath. Ben froze.
Oh please. Not Jason.
Jason Burke's eyes flickered open, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. His face, once familiar, was now twisted by death and something darker still. There was a flicker of recognition in Jason's eyes, a terrible, knowing smile. Without hesitation, Ben lunged, driving the stake down with brutal force into Jason's chest. Jason screamed. A raw, inhuman sound that shook the interior of the jeep. His back arched, hands clawing at the air. Then, all at once, the scream stopped. Jason looked up at Ben one last time, he smiled. And then, like ash in the wind, he dissolved. The dust of him scattered across the back seat, leaving behind only silence and a faint scent of decay. Ben and Mark just arriving into Ferndale and see neon lights on the side of the road up ahead. A vacancies sign flashing up in bright red. Ben pulls up alongside. Also Tuki's bar and grill is illuminated on another sign.
Here on the left looks promising. But maybe worth hiding the Jeep out of sight.
The place looks like an old 60s American diner.
At least we can get some food too,
states Mark. They get out of the Jeep and walk around to the front. Open the front door. Greeted by a middle-aged man.
Hi, I'm Tuki. How can I help you boys?
Looking for a room for a few nights if possible. And do you still have food available?
The kitchen staff have just closed the kitchen down, but I'm sure I could sort something out for you lads. Also our guest room have en suites so you can get cleaned up. Looks like you've been playing in a fire pit.
Tuki laughs.
Something like that,
says Ben. Mark just holds his head down.
Right lads. Here is the key to room 2. Upstairs on the left. Now go and get cleaned up and I'll throw something on the grill. Looks like you need a good meal.
Ben takes the key and they head up the stairs. 30 minutes later Mark and Ben come back down the stairs and head into the bar area.
Grab a seat by the window boys. Food will be out in a minute.
Mark looks at Ben.
Rather we didn't sit by the window.
Can we sit here?
Says Ben. Pointing to a table in the corner.
Suit yourself,
says Tuki. Ben and Mark take a seat in the corner.
Would you like a drink?
Shouts Tuki.
2 club sodas would be great thanks,
says Ben. Mark just looks up with a little smile.
Here you go lads, 2 club sodas. And, I'll grab your food.
Tuki walks off into the kitchen area. 5 minutes later Tuki shows up with 2 plates.
It's nothing special but it will fill your bellies up.
Tuki drops 2 plates on the table. Fries, sausage, peas, egg, onion rings and chicken drumsticks.
Whatever you don't like just leave. Enjoy lads.
Mark dived straight in like he hadn't eaten for a month.
Mark, slow down and try to act normal. Last thing we need is attention.
After finishing the meal they thank Tuki. And head up into the room. The stairs creaked underfoot as they ascended to room 2. The room was modest but clean, with twin beds covered in faded floral quilts and a small window that looked out over the back alley. Ben tossed his duffel bag onto one bed and sat down, untying his boots. Mark wandered over to the window, peering out into the darkness.
Think we'll be safe here?
Mark asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty as he removed his crucifix from his neck and hung it on the handle of the window.
Ben shrugged. It's as good a place as any. We need rest, and Tuki seems alright. Now get some rest.
The first light of dawn crept across the motel room like a thief, dim and pale through the curtains. Mark stirred in bed, half asleep, the edge of a dream still clinging to him. A sound. Scraping. Slow and deliberate. Whispered through the room.
No. Go away. Danny. Ralphie. Go. Away.
Mark bolted upright in bed, breath ragged, only to see Ben sitting calmly at the desk across the room, sharpening a steak with a lock knife. The rhythmic scraping continued. Ben looked up, one eyebrow raised.
Mark? You okay? Dreaming?
Mark exhaled. Rubbing his face.
Yeah. Thought I heard. Danny. Or Ralphie. At the window.
Ben gave a quiet nod. Not laughing. Not dismissing it.
Get dressed. Let's grab some breakfast. Then we head back to the lot. I want to start with the Marston house.
An hour later, they were back in the jeep. Backpacks in the trunk. The early morning sun struggling to burn through a layer of thin clouds. The world felt too quiet.
Right. First stop. Straker's house.
The drive was uneventful. The road stretched empty before them, not a single other car in sight. As they neared the ruins, the blackened shell of the house came into view. What was left of it leaned against the landscape like a wounded beast. The smell hit them before they even parked. Smoke and scorched timber. But beneath that, something worse, something rancid and coppery. Ben pulled up and killed the engine.
Mark. Grab some holy water.
They got out and approached the wreckage. The stone foundation still stood, charred but intact, a perfect blackened outline of the house that had once towered above it. The air was thick with ash. Every step crunched on cinders and broken glass. Ben circled the perimeter, boots crunching on scorched earth. Until he came to the edge of the cellar entrance. A yawning black mouth cut into the earth. The steps down were shadowed and slick with soot.
What are all these?
Mark asked, pointing. Bottles. Dozens of them lay scattered near the opening and down inside. Thick glass vessels filled with a dark red substance, sealed but slightly charred. Some had cracked open, leaking viscous trails that clung to stone and wood like oil. Ben picked one up, inspecting it under the weak sunlight. He unscrewed the cap, slid a finger inside, and pulled it out slowly. The substance clung to his skin. Wet. Thick. Sticky. He brought it close, sniffed, and his face went hard.
It's blood.
Mark took a step back.
What the hell? Who brings bottles of blood to a burned-out house?
Ben didn't answer at first. He stared down into the cellar, his expression turning cold. Then he said it, and Mark joined in with the same name. The same realization.
Straker.
The silence that followed felt heavy. The kind that wrapped around you like a shroud. They stood there, two men staring into a place where they faced the master, fought the master, and staked the master. The truck rumbled back into the empty lot. Its tires crunching softly over gravel and ash. Morning had begun to stretch lazily into the heat of afternoon, shadows shortening beneath a pale washed-out sky. Ben kept his eyes forward as he drove. The familiar houses of Jerusalem's lot sliding by like ghosts. The Glick house. Ben brought the truck to a stop in front of it. The structure loomed ahead. Quiet and still. Windows dark. He and Mark stepped out in silence. The air was heavy with the scent of old smoke and something fouler, stale and sour. Ben approached the porch, boots creaking on the warped wood. He reached for the door and gave it a gentle push. It opened with a low groan. The smell hit them immediately. Wet. Rot. Mold.
There's someone here,
Ben muttered. Scanning the gloom. They stepped inside. The house was cloaked in shadow. Light from the door cut a thin wedge across the dust-covered floor. Every surface was coated in a gray layer of ash. Furniture sat undisturbed, frozen in a moment from before the fires. Mark clutched the holy water tighter. He could feel it pulsing faintly. A subtle warmth against his palm.
Ben,
he whispered.
We found one again.
Ben gave a slow nod, his face hardening. He knelt and unzipped the blue bag with the yellow banding, pulling out a freshly sharpened wooden stake. It caught the light, gleaming faintly.
Check under the stairs,
he said. Mark moved toward the corner of the room.
There's a door. Barely open.
Ben crouched low and crept toward it. Torch in hand. He nudged the door open further. The beam from the flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, curled in the shadows, was a small, pale figure.
Danny Glick.
Ben whispered. He dropped to his knees and pushed the door wider until he could crawl inside. The air was colder here, still and heavy. Danny lay motionless in the gloom. Lips parted. Skin pale as frost.
Mark, shine the torch on his chest. Not his face. His chest.
Mark didn't hesitate. He slid the beam downward, steady, unwavering. It landed square over where Danny's heart should be. Ben took a breath. In one hand, the stake. In the other, the hammer. He positioned the tip of the stake over Danny's chest, paused for just a heartbeat, and then brought the hammer down in a single, forceful motion. The stake drove deep. Danny's eyes snapped open. He screamed, a piercing, soul-rattling shriek that filled the room with pure, unfiltered horror. The air itself seemed to twist around it. Ben didn't flinch.
May you now, rest in peace, Danny Glick.
Danny shuddered violently, mouth open in a final silent scream, and then, slowly, he began to collapse inward, crumbling to ash. The scream faded. Silence returned. Only the sound of their breathing remained. Ben exhaled, lowering the hammer. The stake remained embedded in the pile of ash that had once been a boy. They had won another battle. But the war was far from over. The heavy front door of the Glick house groaned shut. Ben and Mark, as they stepped out into the murky daylight, the sun hovered high above, but its rays couldn't seem to pierce the gloom clinging to the old structure like a second skin. They had barely gone 10 paces when a voice called out. Faint but unmistakable.
Danny? Where are you, Danny, darling?
The words floated through the air, eerie and unnatural, as if carried not by sound but by memory itself. Ben turned slowly. Mark's face had gone pale.
Is that Marjorie Glick?
Ben's jaw tightened.
It's coming from upstairs.
Without another word, they turned back to the door and stepped inside once more, swallowed again by the house's rotting breath. Their footfalls were soft, deliberate, an instinct more than a tactic. Stealth was pointless. She knew they were coming. She had felt them the moment they crossed the threshold. The staircase loomed before them like the throat of a sleeping beast, winding up into a second floor shrouded in unnatural darkness. Though it was still daytime, not a sliver of light touched the steps. It was as if the house had swallowed the sun itself. They climbed slowly. Halfway up, Ben's grip tightened on the stake in his hand. Mark held his crucifix out before him, scanning every shadow, every creak in the walls. At the top landing, the silence broke with a sudden hiss, sharp, wet, and furious. It came from behind the last door on the right. Mark inched forward, raising the cross. One hand reached for the doorknob. Beside him, Ben readied the stake in holy water. The knob turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, and the room was cloaked in gloom. Dust floated in the stillness like particles of decay. And there she was. Marjorie Glick hovered 6 inches above the floor. Her back was straight, her head tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her eyes were blank, glowing faintly, and fixed on nothing. Mark stepped forward, crucifix raised.
Mrs. Glick.
He said, his voice steady. Her eyes snapped to him. With a guttural snarl, she lunged, but Mark was ready. He thrust the crucifix forward, and she recoiled, hissing like steam escaping a boiler. Her face contorted in rage, and she tried to strike him with clawed hands. Ben moved fast. The holy water arced through the air and splashed across her face. She screamed. It was a sound not meant for the living, something ancient and unholy. Smoke rose from her skin, her hands flying to her face as if trying to hold it together. But it was already too late. Ben lunged, stake raised high. With one brutal motion, he drove it down into her chest. Marjorie stiffened.
No coming back from this one.
Ben muttered. A pulse of unnatural force erupted from her body, and then she was gone, her form shooting to the ceiling in a whirl of black ash and glowing orange embers. The remains drifted downward like snowfall, settling in eerie silence. Mark's breath caught.
Where's Ralphie?
He asked, scanning the room.
He must be nearby.
Ben turned, opening his mouth to respond, but before a word left his lips, the wardrobe exploded. The doors flew open so violently they cracked against the walls. A blur of pale flesh and outstretched claws burst forth. Ralphie Glick. His small form twisted through the air like a vengeful ghost, arms stretched wide, mouth open in a snarl. He flew straight at Ben. Ben stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. He crashed to the floor, hard, with Ralphie landing on top of him, clawing and shrieking like a wild animal. His eyes were glowing coals, his mouth filled with jagged, blood-stained teeth. Ben tried to push him off, but Ralphie was fast and inhumanly strong, lashing out with both hands, trying to get his mouth to Ben's throat. The boy was no longer a boy. He was a vampire, and he was hungry. Ralphie Glick was on top of Ben, his face twisted into something barely human. His mouth opened in a silent snarl, eyes wide with unnatural hunger, fingers clawing at Ben's chest. Ben struggled, pinned to the floor, the cold weight of the creature pressing down on him. He reached for the stake but couldn't get to it in time. With a shout, Mark threw himself onto Ralphie from behind, grabbing hold of the boy's wrists and yanking him back. Ralphie twisted and writhed, trying to free himself, but Mark held him fast, forcing his arms out wide into a crucifix position.
Stake him now, Ben.
Mark shouted, straining to keep hold. Ben rolled onto his side and searched the floor, eyes darting in the half-light. He spotted the stake, still lying near the ash pile that had once been Marjorie. His fingers closed around it.
Got it.
He gasped. He rose to one knee, braced himself, and reached forward. One hand gripped Ralphie's shoulder. The boy's face twisted in fury, a low hiss escaping his lips. Ben didn't flinch. He drove the stake forward. The wood struck home, right through the heart. Ralphie let out a sharp, echoing cry that rattled the windows and seemed to hang in the air. His body jolted in Mark's grasp, trembling violently. And then, silence. A moment later, Ralphie collapsed into dust. His form unraveled into fine black ash. Ben let out a long, shaking breath and dropped the stake. Mark stepped back, arms falling to his sides, his face pale and drawn. They both stood in the eerie stillness, chest heaving, hearts pounding. Mark stumbled slightly, knees buckling. Ben caught him, steadying him with a firm arm around his shoulder.
You all right?
Ben asked. Mark nodded weakly.
Yeah. I think so.
Come on.
Ben said. His voice was quiet, but steady now.
Time to leave.
Together, they turned from the room filled with ash and memory and made their way out of the house. A hush had settled over Ferndale as Ben and Mark rolled into town. The late afternoon sun hung low, its light filtered through thick, hazy clouds that cast long shadows over the streets. The town seemed quieter than usual, as though it too sensed something drawing near. They pulled up beside Tookie's bar, the neon sign flickering half-heartedly in the window. Ben turned off the engine. Both men sat in silence, the hum of the car cooling filling the void. Then Mark leaned forward, eyes narrowing.
Ben. Look.
He said. Across the road, a sleek black Cadillac approached, its polished surface reflecting the dull light like obsidian. The vehicle glided along the road with a smoothness that made it seem detached from the world around it. Mark's voice sharpened.
Straker.
Ben stepped out of the car and stood firm on the sidewalk, watching the Cadillac draw near. As it passed, the driver turned his head slowly. Richard Straker. His face was pale, angular, emotionless, until he caught Ben's eye. Then came the grin. A slow, knowing curve of the lips. Not amusement. Not surprise. Recognition. Challenge. Ben held his stare, unflinching. Straker's gaze lingered for a moment longer before he turned his head back to the road. The Cadillac drifted away. In his rearview mirror, Straker watched as Ben and Mark remained standing by the roadside, unmoving sentinels in the fading light. He smiled again, faint but satisfied. Miles away, the Cadillac pulled off the main road and rolled onto a gravel lot surrounded by crumbling trees and silence. The ruins of the Marston house stood ahead. Straker stopped the car next to a wide open maw in the ground, the entrance to the old cellar. He stepped out of the car and moved to the trunk. With a click, it opened to reveal a wooden crate lined with straw. Nestled inside were 12 dark glass bottles, each filled with a thick red liquid. Blood. He lifted the crate carefully, reverently, and carried it to the edge of the cellar. There, he set it down on the dirt and knelt. One by one, he uncorked the bottles. With each twist of the cap, a faint coppery scent rose into the air. He tilted the first bottle, pouring its contents into the darkness below. The blood struck the ash and dirt with a sickening splash, soaking into the ground. Then the next. And the next. All 12 bottles were emptied, each offering poured with a kind of quiet ritual. When the last was gone, Straker set the bottle down, his eyes fixed on the cellar's mouth.
Someone's back in town. And you have unfinished business.
The room above Tookie's bar was small, but it was quiet, for now. Mark sat at the window, arms folded on the sill, his gaze locked onto the parking lot bathed in the pale glow of the full moon. The lot was empty, save for a few scattered vehicles, their shadows long and unnatural in the moonlight. He hadn't said a word since they'd returned. Finally, he broke the silence.
He saw us.
Ben stood behind him, drying his hands with a towel.
Yes.
You think they'll come for us?
I don't know. Just be ready.
They cleaned up in silence, each man locked in his thoughts. The blood and dust were gone from their clothes, but not from their minds. After changing into fresh shirts and jackets, they made their way downstairs to the bar. Tookie was behind the counter, polishing glasses with the slow rhythm of someone used to late nights and stranger stories. He looked up and grinned when they entered.
Fancy a steak?
Mark and Ben exchanged a look.
With all the trimmings, I hope.
Ben said with a half-smile.
Oh, you mean meat?
Mark added, and Tookie raised an eyebrow.
Well, what other kind of steak would I mean?
Tookie laughed.
It's a strange night tonight, I tell ya. You two ask about steaks, and then some other guy asks to be invited in. What's everyone been on today?
Ben's smile vanished.
Invited?
Tookie nodded, towards the corner.
Yeah. Guy over there. Hasn't eaten, hasn't ordered. Just sits there. Rocking back and forth.
Ben followed the line of Tookie's gaze, and felt his stomach drop. In the shadowy far end of the bar sat a figure, hunched, barely moving.
Mike?
Ben whispered. Then louder.
Mike Ryerson. Is that you?
The figure looked up. Mike's eyes gleamed unnaturally under the dim bar lights, a predator's reflection. Mark was already moving. He slipped away, hurrying up the stairs, nearly tripping in his urgency. His hands shook as he fumbled with the key to their room. He shoved open the door, ran to the bed, and grabbed Ben's blue bag. He was back downstairs in seconds, breathless.
Here.
Thrusting it into Ben's hands. Ben unzipped the bag, pulled out a crucifix, and passed it to Mark. Then he took the stake and a vial of holy water for himself. He turned to Tookie.
You might want to step outside for a minute. You're not going to want to see this.
Tookie frowned.
What are you talking about?
Across the room, Mike stood. His body twisted as he rose.
Mias. Ben Mias. Sleep like the dead Mias.
Mark held the crucifix out in front of him. It trembled in his grip, but the symbol glowed faintly as it faced the thing that had once been Mike Ryerson. Ben stepped forward, closing the space between them. Mike recoiled from the crucifix, hissing, then bared his teeth and sprang toward Ben.
Not in my bar.
He reached under the counter and grabbed a baseball bat, slamming it down onto the surface.
If you're gonna fight, take it outside.
But it was already too late. Mike launched himself forward. Ben raised the stake, but Mike struck it from his hand. It clattered across the floor. They collided, grappling violently, crashing over a table that splintered beneath them. Chairs flew in all directions. Ben hit the ground hard with Mike on top of him, the vampire's hands clutching at his throat. His fingers scrabbled on the floor, reaching. Then he felt it, a jagged piece of the broken chair. Splintered. Sharp. Without thinking, Ben seized it and drove it backward, straight into Mike's back. Mike let out an unearthly shriek. His body convulsed, froze, then turned to dust in Ben's arms. Silence fell. Ben lay on the floor, covered in ash, breathing hard. Slowly, he sat up and looked at Tookie, who stood frozen behind the bar, eyes wide with shock. Ben brushing soot from his sleeve.
No easy way to say this. Do you believe in vampires?
Ben slumped onto the old stool at the edge of the bar. His face pale and tight with exhaustion.
Well, Tookie,
he said, voice low and gravelly.
You saw it with your own eyes. Vampires. Real ones.
Tookie, drying a glass with a trembling hand, gave a weak chuckle.
You sound like my brother-in-law. He called me a few weeks back. Swore strange things were happening down at the lot. Then, nothing. Disappeared. Took my sister, I think. Left town without a trace.
Mark turned to him sharply.
Who's your brother-in-law?
A voice behind them chimed in. Ben, ever alert.
Wait, you don't mean Officer Gillespie?
Tookie nodded grimly.
Officer Gillespie is your brother-in-law?
Ben asked, brows furrowing. Before Tookie could answer, the door creaked open. A figure stepped into the bar, silhouetted in the pale glow from the streetlight beyond. A wide-brimmed hat cast shadows over his face.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Came the smooth, confident voice. Ben stood abruptly, eyes narrowing.
Straker.
The man tipped his hat slightly.
Indeed. And it's Mr. Straker to you.
A sudden tapping sound broke the tension. Light, rhythmic scratching against the window. Everyone turned. There, just beyond the glass, stood Father Callahan, his grin chilling as he stared directly at Ben.
How are you still alive?
Mark said in disbelief, taking a step back. Straker's voice echoed, unnaturally calm.
You have much to learn, young Petrie. When you become the Master's servant, you're given a gift. I took a full round of bullets and I'm still standing. And now, so is Barlow.
Barlow?
Ben breathed.
But, how?
Straker's eyes gleamed.
He was never destroyed on hallowed ground. Every time I feeds him, the blood soaks into the cellar. The soil, the ash, they take it in. It revives him, regenerates him. You thought you killed a being that has walked this earth for hundreds of years?
A chilling scrape against the glass tore Ben's attention back to the window.
That looks like Ned Tebbets.
He whispered.
And old Weasel too.
Straker gave a hollow laugh.
Ah. More of my family arrives.
Suddenly, Tookie lunged with a baseball bat, aiming straight for Straker's head. The wood whistled inches above him. Ben reacted fast, diving at Straker and tackling him to the floor. They struggled violently, overturning a bar stool and smashing a nearby glass.
Mark. A stake. Quick.
Ben shouted, wrestling to keep Straker pinned. Mark scrambled for Ben's bag, tossing bottles and tools aside. Tookie dropped the bat and joined in, helping hold Straker down.
Now Mark.
Ben grunted.
We can't hold him much longer.
Mark found the stake and hammer, shoving them into Ben's hands. With one final effort, Tookie pressed Straker's chest down as Ben lined up the stake. The hammer swung high, and came crashing down. Straker let out a guttural growl as the stake pierced his heart. Ben struck again. And again. Finally, Straker fell still. Ben collapsed backward onto the floor, breathing hard.
He won't be coming back.
Mark's eyes darted to the window.
What about Barlow?
This any good?
Tookie asked, stepping out from behind the bar, holding a heavy crossbow. Ben and Mark turned. Ben raised an eyebrow.
What else does he keep back there?
Tookie handed him the weapon. Ben walked slowly toward the window. Callahan was still there, waiting. Smiling. Unholy eyes burning into him. Ben muttered under his breath.
Forgive me, Father, for what I'm about to do.
He raised the crossbow. Took aim. The bolt flew cleanly through the thin glass, punching a dime-sized hole before slamming into Callahan's chest. The priest let out a scream as his body convulsed, then exploded into a fine mist that drifted away into the night. Ben was already reloading. He turned the crossbow toward Ned Tebbets, now pressed against the window, his lips moving slowly.
Susan.
Ned moaned, voice distorted and deep. Ben froze. The name slicing into him like a blade. Emotion flooded his chest. His hands trembled. Then Mark stepped forward, snatched the crossbow, and without hesitation pulled the trigger. The bolt shattered the window. Ned didn't scream, just vanished in a whisper of ash. Mark turned to Weasel.
You're invited.
He said coldly. Weasel hissed, and surged through the shattered window. Arms outstretched, he collided with Mark and the two crashed into the wall, knocking loose a padded booth cushion. Ben grabbed the crossbow, quickly reloading.
Hold him still, Mark.
He shouted. Mark grunted, struggling against the creature's unnatural strength. Ben took aim, and fired. The bolt ripped through Weasel's back and pierced his heart. Weasel howled in agony, then shrieked his final words.
Getting warmer.
Before collapsing into a lifeless pile of ash. Ben exhaled, letting the crossbow fall.
Tookie. You got any wood?
He asked, already heading toward the windows.
We need to board these up.
Tookie nodded, disappearing behind the bar again. Mark stared out into the dark.
What about Barlow?
Ben paused, then looked back.
We finish Barlow tomorrow.
Morning broke with a soft orange glow cutting through the mist that still clung to the broken windows of the old bar. Mark and Ben sat in the dim light, waiting. Moments later, Tookie stepped in from the side entrance, wiping sleep from his eyes. Ben didn't waste time.
We need to finish Barlow once and for all.
Mark glanced sideways.
But how? Last time, it didn't work. And we barely made it out.
This time, we don't have Straker to bring him back.
Ben replied firmly.
And we've got a better idea of what to do. If we finish him.
Tookie leaned forward, eyebrows raised.
So, what do we need?
Ben pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his coat pocket and started scribbling.
Here's the list: hammer, stakes, holy water, cable, crossbow bolts and planks of wood.
Planks?
Mark asked, confused.
If Barlow's in that cellar, we'll need to drag him out. The stairs are gone. Just rubble. If the planks are long enough, we'll use them as a slope.
After a quick breakfast and a silent moment of shared understanding, the three men got to work. Mark and Ben loaded their gear into the old Jeep, while Tookie climbed into his battered van. The convoy rolled out, tires crunching over gravel as they returned to the ruins of the Marston house. It loomed like a skeleton in the fog-charred collapsed beams and silence. They reached the cellar opening and skidded to a halt. Tookie arrived minutes later, his van coughing as it came to a stop. At the back of the van, they opened the doors and hauled out long scaffold boards. Mark took one end, Tookie the other, and they carefully carried it to the edge of the cellar.
Drop one end down. We need a slope.
Ben instructed. The board hit the rubble below with a thud. They laid a second one beside it, forming a crude but usable ramp. Ben pulled out the crossbow bolts, attaching metal rings to each. He clipped a cable onto one, loaded the crossbow, and stood at the cellar's edge. Thwack! The bolt sank into the ash, but when Ben tugged the line, it popped up empty. Nothing, he muttered. Reloaded. Fired again. Same result. 6 attempts. Nothing but gray silence.
This ain't working. And we're running out of daylight.
Tookie returned to the van and grabbed a long metal bar.
How about I slide down and poke around a bit?
You could, but if Barlow's down there, he's not like the others.
Tookie shrugged.
I'll be quick.
He slid down the ramp on his backside. Mark passed the metal rod to him. Tookie jabbed it into the ash. Moving slowly. After a few minutes, he stopped.
Think I've found something. Coffin-shaped.
Ben leaned closer.
Can you get a rope around it?
Don't think so. But maybe I can shoot into it and pull it.
Ben passed Tookie the loaded crossbow. Tookie took aim and fired. The bolt vanished into the ash. Then Ben attached the cable to the Jeep.
Okay, go slow.
Ben said, jumping into the driver's seat. The Jeep reversed, tires biting the dirt. The cable pulled taut. Then, something stirred beneath the ash. A long, gray shape began to rise. The coffin surfaced like the Titanic pulled from the depths. Tookie guided its end onto the scaffold boards, and together they dragged it up. The coffin reached the surface with a scrape and a thud. Ben killed the engine, jumped out, and approached the coffin with Mark, who stood ready, stake in one hand, hammer in the other. Ben pried open the lid. Empty.
What? No, Barlow.
Mark's grip on the stake didn't loosen. Tookie, still in the cellar, called up.
What's going on? Is he dead?
Suddenly, the crossbow clattered back up onto the gravel. A scream followed. Ben spun around.
Tookie.
Barlow had risen from the ash. A filthy, blue-skinned horror with sunken eyes and clawed hands. He grabbed Tookie by the leg, pulling him closer. Ben ran for the crossbow.
Mark, unhook the coffin.
Mark yanked the line free and passed it to Ben. Ben loaded a fresh bolt, clipped the cable, and aimed into the cellar. Barlow was feeding now, sunk deep into Tookie's neck. Ben fired. The bolt struck Barlow's back. He turned with a hiss. Furious. Inhuman. Mark jumped into the jeep, foot on the clutch. Ben gave the signal.
Now.
The tires screamed as the jeep shot backward, the cable snapping taut. Barlow was yanked from the cellar like a rag doll. He hit the sunlight, and burst into flames. Ben reloaded the crossbow, and fired again. The bolt struck true. Barlow screamed one last time before collapsing into a pile of ash. Silence. Ben stumbled back to the van and pulled out a beer keg from Tookie's bar.
Grab the spade,
he said quietly. Mark found it and passed it to him. Together, they shoveled Barlow's remains into the keg. As they worked, Mark looked back toward the cellar.
We can't leave Tookie. He'll turn.
Ben nodded, eyes dark.
I'll do it.
He slid down into the cellar, crossbow in hand. One shot, right to the heart.
Rest easy, Tookie. You were a good man.
Ben emerged again. Quiet and resolute. They placed the sealed keg into the jeep, and headed toward the old church, where they spent the first night they returned to the lot. Inside the sanctuary, they opened the keg, and scattered Barlow's ashes around the altar. The broken stained glass caught the last rays of the departing sun, as the town fell silent once more. 18 months later. Mark and Ben stood at another altar. Older, wearier, their clothes stained from the road. They filled small bottles with holy water from a cracked font. The water shimmered, glowing faintly blue.
They found us again. Another one has found us.
We have to go further.